Welcome back to Powered by Play. I'm Drew, and I'm a professor of theater at Chapman University in Southern California.
I'm Avery, and I'm a theatrical scenic designer. Every month on this podcast, we explore what we play, how we play, and why we play.
We believe play powers us, and that's what makes it powerful.
All right, Drew.
All right, Avery.
Press play.
This time, we are discussing playing pilot, driver, and rider. So we're going to talk about a lot of different methods of transportation and ways we move around, whether they're a creature with four legs, or wheels, or sails, or rails, propellers, steam, jets, skis, sleds. What carries us? What do we pilot, and what do we drive? And Avery, I found a great quote to begin with. This is from the wonderful civil rights leader and representative for many years, Elijah Cummings. And Representative Cummings said, "Our decisions about transportation determine much more than where roads or bridges or tunnels or rail lines will be built. They determine the connections and barriers that people will encounter in their daily lives, and thus how hard or easy it will be for people to get where they need and want to go." So I thought that was a great way to begin.
If I could just do away with all of the world's transportation modes, I would certainly choose trains to be the one that we all use all the time, because as somebody from Southern California, where trains are not really a big thing, whenever I've traveled to other places that do have them, they are just objectively a little bit more efficient, and they are not late as much as buses might be, but they're not as carbon eating uppy as planes might be, and you also don't have to really go through a TSA for all the planes and stuff. So 100%, let's start a new world where there's just trains, Drew. How about that?
I would totally live in that world. One of the wonderful things about trains is that you watch the countryside go by. What's interesting to me is in many places, train tracks are laid down in places where freeways or highways are not. And so you see a different part of the landscape. I remember a couple summers ago when I was traveling in Slovenia and then the Czech Republic and then over to Austria. I was on this train that was taking me from country to country, and I opened the window of the train and I just felt the air on my face, and I watched miles and miles and miles of beautiful green forest, and it was almost romantic, Avery. I'll put it that way. I don't know what it was, but just being in nature and being in this mode of transportation that just kind of speeds along. Literally, it's one track. There are no lanes. There's nothing to switch until you get to where the trains actually have to switch over. But it is an experience, I think, that doesn't have a comparison.
Now that I think about it, though, you bring up a good point that the train experience has that specific speed of passing through the environment. Whereas if we did happen to replace everything with portals and teleporters, what would we see during our transportation? Like, would we just blink and then we're in the new place? And I'm sure that's more efficient. But then again, can you put on your headphones while looking out the window and play a song that only you can hear that makes you feel like you are in a movie?
Oh yeah. I mean, obviously teleporters, yeah. It would be so wonderful. How many of us have been just stuck in an airport or a train station or whatever it is, just waiting and waiting and waiting and watching that clock or waiting in lines. Yeah, a teleporter would be amazing. I think that when I think about like all the pop culture versions of teleporters, like Star Trek and beaming from location to location, or especially the really scary teleporter in the movie The Fly. And what would happen if we got caught in a teleporter with an insect or something that our molecules got mixed up with? Ugh,
Wow.
I
Ugh.
know. Yeah, I don't know. What about, Avery, if you could only use one mode of transportation for the rest of your
Ooh,
life?
I think I think I'd probably go with a hang glider because think about it. If you just launch yourself off from anywhere, from high enough, you can probably get to wherever you need to go. And there shouldn't be much traffic and you get to kind of fly and float, but you don't have to necessarily like flap anything because that's kind of where the technological limitations kind of come with like flapping wings, especially with like the Leonardo da Vinci-esque style, those kinds of wings. If we had some of those that worked really well, I would enjoy those. I think flying, but not necessarily in a plane or in a helicopter. Like I want to experience the air and okay, I don't really want to experience the bugs in my face, but the air and the nice wind, and I think that would be really cool. What about you?
Haha. I think I'm going to keep closer to the ground. I'm Heights and I are not good friends. So I'm going to say I would love to travel everywhere in one of those dog sleds and
Ooh.
have like a team of dogs that I just took everywhere with me and then parked outside like I would have a dog parking space. And I think that'd be super cool. Failing that, or if I had to go too far for the dogs to bring me effectively, I think I would want like a system of roller coasters that could bring me from city to city. And I could just, because I mean, come on, you want a little bit of fun, right? When
Yeah.
you're traveling from place to place. Yes, I don't know, listen to NPR or whatever if I'm screaming on a roller coaster, but I mean, it sure would make the trip a little more memorable.
You're right. I think also a zip line would be pretty cool to have everywhere, especially at my campus where I'm currently a grad student. There are several really long hallways, and unfortunately, we have to walk through them. Like we can't just have a zip line system from one end to the other, which I think would be basically more efficient, but also would help me avoid having to worry about, do I make eye contact with this person that I'm seeing 50 feet away? Do I make eye contact when they're 30 feet away? What about 5 feet away? Do I wave and then I don't do anything? And it's just like, yeah, if I'm ziplining, I don't have to worry about any of those social obligations.
Absolutely, 100%.
What kinds of memories would you grow up with around transportation?
Oh man. I think well, I have a couple. The first one is when I was an undergrad, my roommate really wanted to learn to windsurf,
Oh
and
my
this was a
gosh.
thing in the 90s. I don't see a lot of windsurfing now. I don't know whether it's still a thing or whether it's just completely been replaced, but windsurfing, I had to hold the sail up and sort of direct with the sail where I wanted the wind to blow and where I wanted it to carry me. And so what ended up happening was when I put the sail in just the correct place, suddenly I would be skimming across the water at high speed. And I would be just astonished at how fast I was going and worried that I wouldn't be able to catch wind to go back to the shore. And so I would turn the sail to kind of like turn around. And then at some point, the sail would get to some kind of angle where suddenly everything would stop and
No,
the
no.
sail would drop into the water. And so I'd be
Oh
there on
my
my little
gosh.
board with a sail in the water that I had to pick up and drag out. And it's not easy to pull one of those sails out of the water. And then you start the process all over again. I never did get the hang of it. It was fun trying, and I'm glad that I took the lessons, but oh my goodness. That was a crazy experience just trying to figure out how to manage wind and water and the movement of the me moving around the sail, which was kind of hard. And then another memorable moment was when my daughter was born. She was at kind of a regular hospital that didn't have a lot of extra stuff to help babies that were struggling. And when she was born, she couldn't breathe. Her lungs were filled with this junk called meconium. And so what they had to do was take her from the hospital where she was to the children's hospital, and they had a lot of new and more powerful tools to help her. And so I watched her get loaded. She was in this kind of plastic box, and I watched her get loaded onto a helicopter that was going to take her to Phoenix Children's Hospital. And Avery, the sight of this like tiny baby in the first hours of her life being loaded onto this big machine, and helicopters are noisy. And I just watched, I was there on the roof and I watched them take the container and just kind of roll it up this ramp into this big metal flying thing, and it just took off into the sky. And I thought that huge machine is just taking this tiny little child, and I have no idea where it's going to drop her off on the other end. And I'm going to go and find her at Phoenix Children's. But it was just kind of an exercise in trust and an exercise in thinking, I have never been in a helicopter or been this close to a helicopter. And my little baby gets to ride one on her first day. So that was certainly a memorable moment. How
Wow,
about
that is
you?
really intense.
Yeah, it was
Um,
intense.
my siblings and I would go to Irvine Regional Park a lot growing up. They have a lot of bikes for rental, but they have like the normal cruiser or BMX bikes to rent, but they also have tandem bikes, which is just like a bike with two seats, one in front of the other, which is easier for the taller brother that we have and my sister's boyfriend at the time. It was funny because she and her boyfriend would just take myself and my younger brother with them on their dates because our mom was like, "Hey, go take your siblings out with you." And it we had a lot of group hangouts as a result. So this park was definitely one of our choices a lot of the time. They also had a single surrey, which is with like two pedalers on four wheels. And then there's also, the other version of the Surrey that has four pedalers on several wheels. But we'd always usually choose like one tandem bike and one Surrey so that we could, take turns on the tandem bike or take turns on the Surrey, and that was kind of our system and our way of exploring the area and going along all those little bike paths. But those tandem bikes, those are they need smaller ones because with us like 5 feet tall people who weigh less than 100 pounds, we certainly had trouble with managing those and steering those. My other, side of, fun sibling and sister's boyfriend time, and I mean, they're married now, so we still also do, group hangouts, of course, but we would often also go kayaking as a family, or sometimes we would be doing, like, scout camps. I think I've been to Catalina a couple times where we'd also row some boats. I've even been water biking with my siblings as well. I think it's somewhere in Long Beach-ish. It's bikes but on the water and you still pedal. Like that was pretty fascinating. But those have always just been kind of relaxing, meandering kind of hangouts. Other transportation memories of mine. I was obsessed with horses growing up. I'm glad that we can delve a lot more into that this episode. I was obsessed with just My Little Pony or books about horses or including the My Secret Unicorn series, which was this little girl who buys a pony, but he's actually secretly also a unicorn, and so going on magical little adventures. I think the rose-colored dream of countryside living and animal friendship were definitely the highlights of all that for me. And the connotations of a young person riding a horse is very much about the freedom and the wind in your hair, and just thinking about Merida from the movie Brave, where you're just defying social norms of, stay home and drive a car, and go to school for business or and such, and then there's the kid who's like, "No, I wanna ride horses. I want to befriend wild horses and bring them home, and I wanna talk to all the animals in the kingdom," or whatever. Like, there's a lot of freedom and, defiance of gender expectations that might go along with being obsessed with horses that has always been a very enjoyable theme. I did skateboard for a bit during undergrad, so I would see other people skateboarding and got inspired to learn. I got far enough to learning how to ollie. Well, actually, no, I did not learn how to ollie. I was trying to ollie, which is where you are on your skateboard, but you jump up with your skateboard. And I just kept trying for that, but the risk was a little bit too much for me. I didn't like that I kept getting injured and that my bones just felt frail and whatever. So I kind of stopped there. But if I were to pick it up again, I would try more longboarding, which is the more cruising kind of skateboarding. But there's always the theme of in different kinds of transportation sports, there's always the tricks that you can do, but then there's also the cruising that you can do. And there's always different genres of kind of each thing within the sport transportation area that you're delving into. And then one more game that I've played that's been related to cars has been Car Mechanic Simulator, which was a very wonderful way for me to learn about car parts and feeling the accomplishment of learning how to put together cars and stuff. And I do want to eventually learn how to take care of my cars better one day. But for now, I'm just gonna, not really know how they work and then just continue about my day. But I think there's a lot of themes around also with ownership and transformation and coming of age about kind of cars and transportation. So we're definitely going to talk some more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that before we learn how to drive, we simulate being a driver. And there are driving video games, arcade games, toy trucks and cars, toy trains, kid cars where the little kid gets in the car and moves the car around with their feet like the old Flintstones kind of thing.
Yeah.
And oh, I know, I know. And classic Red Wagon. So being in things with wheels or moving things around with wheels, or Autopia at the Disney parks, where you can drive a car before you can legally drive a car. But even before you get in a simulated car, you also can ride a bike. You were talking about the bikes at Irvine Regional Park. You can ride a bike like the kids in Stranger Things. That's how they got around, the kids in E.T. I think there's a whole, it's either a board game or an RPG called Kids on Bikes that kind of, gets to that. And when I was a kid, it was all about roller skates and just kind of like skating around, whether it was overland or at a skating rink. And I have to tell you, I loved roller skating when I was a kid. Because, well, you were talking about those of us who are on the shorter side. So with a lower center of gravity, it actually helps you out. It was like the one time that I was really coordinated at something was when I was roller skating and I could like, get down and go fast and that kind of thing. Ice skating, I only tried, oh man, like maybe once when I was a kid. I think because I grew up in Southern California, roller skating was sort of more the way to go. But I loved just the going one direction and the free skate and all that good stuff. It was lots of fun, and the music and the disco lights, it was a good time. So that was part of coming of age. And I know that you're going to have something to say about roller coasters and big roller coasters. And I agree. There was a time in life when I was not ready to go on things that went in a loop, went upside down, or went really fast. And again, for those of us who are on the shorter side, waiting to get to that stupid arrow that said you are now tall enough to ride this ride, that was kind of a a marker of maturing and becoming an older kid or whatever. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention was that a couple of times during childhood, we went to visit my mom's uncle and aunt who lived in Washington State, and they had a little cabin on an island called Whidbey Island, and they had a rowboat. And so one year, I think I was in my teens, and I was old enough to go on that rowboat with my sister and row us both around. Like I was strong enough to move both the oars and actually get us out onto the ocean a little bit and row us around and row us back. And I thought, wow, that is really cool. I mean, yes, it's a tiny, tiny little boat, but being strong enough to tell that boat where to go and go out and come back seemed like a big accomplishment. And I just remember coming back to the shore, the sort of rocky shore, and rowing us both in and pulling the boat in. And I thought that is really cool. It again, like the train, there was something romantic, something that helped you touch history, touch the past, and the ways that people lived before mechanization and before gas and coal became the ways that things were powered.
Yeah.
But what about you, Avery? What was it like growing up with transportation?
Well, you reminded me that my siblings and I would also go roller skating and ice skating a lot as a kid. And I do remember starting out with roller skating, I had to clutch the wall the whole time. I think back then, though, okay, so nowadays you can rent out like a little stroller roller that, for kids or anybody who needs like skating assistance, you can like hold on to it while you skate around. But those weren't a thing at the rink that I went to back as a kid, so I would just clutch the wall for loops and loops and loops, and I just remember that it took me many times to finally be able to slowly stop touching the wall, but, still being near it, and then even more times to be able to skate around without touching the wall at all. I remember feeling the sense of pride that I deserved when I had a whole session where I didn't touch the wall, and I was super proud of myself because I felt like I had developed some new skill and I was now older and more mature. And then same thing for ice skating too. We also, started out touching the wall a lot, and now I'm at a point where I've been able to go backwards a little bit. Not super fluently, but a little bit. And that ability to spend time bonding with my siblings or my friends, as well as working on my own skills and coordination, has been really wonderful. And I'm glad that I also am usually one of the designated ice skating teachers when it comes time to show my friends how to ice skate. And similarly with learning to ride a bike, I remember the day that I stopped using my training wheels. That was a really big, big day for me. There's a show called Schitt's Creek, which involves a formerly wealthy family being forced to live in a tiny rundown town, and none of these family members know how to ride a bike, including the wealthy adult children. And the reason was that the parents had been really too aloof to teach them when they were younger, but there was also just no need for them to learn how to bike. So their disconnect between their bodily coordination was kind of symbolic of the disconnect within their family of actual compassion and care. So it's just really comedic and funny to watch them struggle the heck out of trying to ride these bikes, which is traditionally it's a thing that you learn in your childhood. I think that's kind of a cliche around, adults who don't know how to swim. Maybe, there might be reasons that they don't know how to do these quote unquote basic tasks or basic functions is that it takes being able to have a mentor and the resources and, the adult supervision to safely learn how to do these things. But, sometimes that's just not what your life has. Also with cars is that they are so symbolic of ourselves oftentimes. They are this portable space that we own. You can go where you want to go once you're old enough to, but until then you're dependent on your caregivers to drive you around. You can play music or you might be at the mercy of somebody else's music. You have kind of a false sense of privacy and you are able to look out into the world while you're in there. And even in, like, for example, vandalism against a car, that's not just against, the vehicle, it's an attack on the person when you see that kind of in world in our news stories and in movies as well. An example of this identification with cars is present in a lot of cinema, including the movies Knives Out or Glass Onion, which has very, rich, wealthy characters have their cars. So I was looking up, I was looking up an article about. So in Knives Out, there's a car chase involving a Hyundai Ascent, which is like a very in the movie. It's a very just shabby car, but the articles that I was trying to find, they only mentioned the expensive ones, and I was trying to find the not expensive one. Anyway, so in Knives Out, the 1972 BMW 3.0 CSI or whatever is apparently what the Chris Evans character drives, and it's a very charming kind of 70s looking car. But the character, like, he uses it as a daily driver. He gets it muddy in a muddy forest, and he is able to, like, he's flooring it, like, he clearly, and even with his costume design and his, like, accessories too, he just, like, uses and abuses what he has. Whereas in Glass Onion, which is the sequel to Knives Out, the main expensive car is a baby blue colored Porsche 918 Spider. You can tell that I talk about cars very often. I don't. Which is the pride and joy of the billionaire character Miles Braun, and he has this car just displayed on top of his glass mansion. It's just like rotating on a pedestal, and it's like he apparently, it seems like he used to drive it, but he just is just on top of a giant building on an island. Like, he just displays it. And he even has like a miniature version of it that's a drink cooler, which is super cute and funny. But the way that the protagonist is able to kind of use his wealth as just like destroy his wealth and, crush it and use the car as a way of destruction, just without being too spoilery, is a prime example of how, like, connected your image is to your car. Like, with how in Knives Out, like, Marta, who's, from an immigrant family, like, she just has like an affordable, regular, shabby car, whereas it the characterization and personalization really comes out of what we have, what we wear, what we drive. And even when you are, learning to drive, sometimes you're starting out with driving your family's car. And other times when you are from a place of wealth and class, maybe you get your own new car right out of the gate. But another example of a movie kind of car transformation and coming of age example is with the Lady Bird movie, where the protagonist character just has to be driven around by her parents all the time, to the point where they're arguing so much, or she's arguing so much with her mom, that at one point she pushes herself out of the moving car and breaks her arm and just has a cast for most of the movie. And her, I think, pushing herself out of the car is a symbolic act of, I want to be out of this dependent cycle. I want to be out of this argument cycle. I don't want to be like my mom. I want to be my own person. I don't know who that person that I'm going to be is yet, but I just know that I want to not, be these prescribed ideas about what my parents want me to be. And there's even some scenes in parking lots in that movie where Timothy Chalamet is hanging out, and all the cool teens in their cars that they have are all, they're all hanging out. And of course, Timothy's reading a book on the back of his car because, he's just cool like that. But of course, Lady Bird doesn't have a car yet, so she kind of has to has to work her way up in terms of the coolness factor to be able to befriend these cool teens.
Avery, it seems almost like the metaphor of a baby bird trying to leave the nest and
Yeah.
fly. I mean, literally, ladybird, right? Which I know is sort of it's British for ladybug, but like a small bird leaving the nest and trying to fly but not quite being able to and breaking its wing. I wonder if that was a thing that they were thinking about
Mm.
when, yeah, when she pushes herself out of the car and breaks her wing. Not quite ready. Not quite ready to
Yeah.
learn how to fly.
Yeah. That's a really astute analysis. And by the end, she is able to go to college and get her own car. And there's that extra sense of accomplishment because where she previously, failed to fly, now she was able to. And then one more movie, last one, would be The Incredibles, just as an example, where Bob, the big superhero guy, he, in the beginning, back in the cool superhero days, he has a nice car, it has powers, the police scanner and everything. Superheroes then become ruled illegal, so he has to now drive a tiny car for, the foreseeable future where he's just squished in it. It's basically representing how Bob, Mr. Incredible, is being squished into a lifestyle that he physically cannot fit into. His soul cannot fit into this illegal superhero kind of nonsense. And so one day he's flown out via private jet to a new island, accepts secret superheroism, for Syndrome, and then he's able to get this nicer new car, and then he fits in this one. It's fancy, it's sleek, it's back in the good old days too. I think that was just a very interesting example from this Pixar movie about being squished into lifestyles versus being released into the classy lifestyles that we kind of envision ourselves to want to be in.
Yeah, I love the idea of driving a car that quote unquote fits us. And you talked about sort of the curation of self and trying to figure out, okay, how do I show who I am with this car? How about bumper stickers? How about a car that I choose or a color of a car that I choose? And I was thinking of a couple of things. The first thing is the stick figure families
Oh
that a
yeah.
lot of cars have. And then I've seen a few times Star Wars figures and like a Sith family or a Sith baby. And it always just kind of makes me go, what? Are you are you really like what is it about the dark side that attracts you, and are you really casting your entire family as the Sith? And it just kind of boggles my mind. And here's the other thing, Avery, the auto manufacturer Tesla. So, of course, under the control of Elon Musk. And at the time of this recording, new Tesla trucks have hit the road, and they are these silver sort of space age looking things. They look like something out of Blade Runner. I don't know. But here's the thing when Tesla first started, I think to drive a Tesla meant something very specific. They were electric cars and they were very efficient and very kind of new. It was a new concept. And the idea was that perhaps you didn't have to buy a new car, you could upgrade parts of your Tesla, and all you had to do was plug in. You never had to buy gas and stuff like that. And again, as of this recording, we have Elon Musk now seen in a different way, shall we say, than he was seen when he started these companies and especially when he started Tesla. And
Mhm.
so I have a feeling that people who at one time wanted to be associated with Tesla and with Musk now perhaps are questioning that as his sort of political affiliations shift and as his sort of views on society shift. I wonder if someone who bought a Tesla, for example, 3 years ago would buy one today.
Mhm.
Yeah. How about travel, Avery, and all the different ways that we travel when we are away from our own cars? What do you think?
I love using public transportation when I am traveling. I think when I went to Rome, that was kind of one of the first times that I had really done that a lot, and it very much allowed me to see everyday people and the inhabitants of where they were going and what they just normally dressed like, as well as just seeing the city around me, even overhearing conversations in Italian and being able to have my own sense of navigating around the city. And that was even my own coming of age installment within that 2-week trip. For it was like a study abroad thing where we all did a project on it's just something that we wanted to research. And I remember the day that I finally it just clicked in my head of like, "Oh, I have to take this train to go there, this train goes there," and, that was just a really nice way for me to get around with also, not that expensive as well. And when I've been to Vietnam a couple times, I would mostly go to Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City to visit my family, and all the motorcycles around me were just very I mean, they affect the amount of motorcycles in the city affects every single thing about the city. Like, even when you're indoors, you hear the beeps and the rustles and, movements of the motorcycles on the roads around you. You hear all that even when you're walking around, and even the sidewalks are filled with motorcycles because that's kind of where they get parked during the day. And even you also have to watch out even when you're on the sidewalks because sometimes the motorbikes will drive on the sidewalks because of other circumstances. Like there's, if they just need to go around something, that the sidewalks themselves, they're always curbed enough that bikes can drive onto them at any point. And even understanding the flow of the roads and crossing streets like that, talk about another coming of age moment of where I had to learn how to cross a street that is having a massive flow of motorcyclists from both directions. There's not really a stoplight, and there's just incoming traffic both ways. So just looking left, looking right, judging how far away somebody is versus how far you are. Okay, how fast do I have to walk? All right, cool. Past that bike, look to my right, see if there's anything else, look to the left. Like, it's kind of a flow that by the time that I had been there for a month, it was natural to me then. And then now I'm back in the United States, and just the culture around crossing streets with cars, like I'm just more nervous about because even with bikes, they can navigate around you a bit better. They're usually able to see you a bit better because, some cars are like taller than me, even like the trucks that you see. Anyway, but getting to understand the road crossing culture of different places. Oh my gosh. Speaking of Rome as well, there was one day where there were all these cars on this road and I was trying to cross it and there was just no way, and I'm just a socially anxious person. Like I'm not great with making eye contact with drivers or like asserting myself in front of cars in order to cross a street that I need to cross. Like I was just wallowing on that street forever. Like I don't even remember how I got out of there, but it's just like there's so many there's so many cultural things around transportation even when you are going to somewhere else that language in itself is something to learn and understand. And I have been on a cruise ship as a kid with my family. I think it was a Carnival cruise. It was very abundant with luxury and buffets and all the high-tech entertainment venues and pools and stuff. And there is a lot of kind of consumption culture around the cruise nowadays. Whereas I think as a kid, I felt really romantically attached to the little library lounges that had the bookshelves, and I loved seeing the wooden staircases and, imagining that this boat was from a more antique time and that we were far away from technology and, now we have to fend for ourselves and work together to maintain a composed crew atmosphere. But no, it was just more of just like a party time and just a lot. It was just like a big fancy hotel on the water. And I think if I could change something about the cruise line industry, like other than other controversies about the labor and the pollution and such, I would definitely prefer if there were some that were just like we need immersive cruises that are like they can be fantasy themed, they can be steampunk themed, they can be, some sort of historical themed. I think we need to be done with oh, this is just like a big hotel with parties and pools and stuff. Like, we need to go into the themed environment for them, in my professional opinion. But I think my desire to kind of have I didn't like as a little I don't know, what was I, 9? I was 9 on this cruise, like, I didn't just want I just didn't want, like, a, relaxing time or whatever. Like, I was obsessed with the Titanic, I was obsessed with, like, adventures, and I think I kind of wanted this cruise to, like, have a little danger and, like, have some kind of spark of the story and whatever. And I think that's something that's carried on with me a lot for when I have traveled, not to as much of a degree, but like I said, like I love listening to, dramatic music while I'm on a commute or being able to meet new people and then explore their backstories and stuff. And I think the interesting thing about even games and kind of digital worlds as well is that when we are transporting ourselves into a new place, we are learning new things and seeing new people and places. And yeah, I would love to hear what you have to say about traveling and exploring.
Yeah, cruise ships, really interesting concept, aren't they? Because we talked so much about overland travel and seeing the countryside, whether it's from a train or whether it's Route 66 in the
Mhm.
United States. And as sort of, I think about the movie Cars when I think about Route 66. And then there are cruises where you are traveling on the water. I mean, that is, you spend most of your time on the water when you are moving, sort of when you're going from place to place overnight. And so you are restricted to cities that are, of course, close to the coast. And it is really interesting to think about being on the ocean, and that is your canvas, right? That is where you are and what you're looking at, and you might see some dolphins, and you will probably feel the ship kind of like move from side to side just a little bit. And I know that in the entertainment industry on cruise ships, they have to kind of adjust for that.
Yeah.
Especially when dancing, you have to adjust for the movement of the ship, which I think is pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
But other times when you are visiting a new place, a new city, when you're traveling, if you can get to know the public transportation Absolutely 100% wonderful if you can navigate it a little bit like a local. I love the London Underground. I love all the names of the stop: Charing Cross Road and Elephant and Castle and the Angel at Islington, I think, was one of the stops. So I kind of love that. And then you're also probably going to use Uber or Lyft and or a taxi. So you have to question, do you trust the driver? Are you okay driving with this person? And do you want to have a conversation with the person? If you are doing stars and they are doing stars for you, you sort of think about, how am I coming across? I want to make sure that someone else would want to drive me. And so I have to kind of keep up the conversation and seem interested in what this person is doing. Okay, Avery, I have a story. When I was in my junior year of undergrad, I was studying abroad in Canterbury in England, and a group of friends and I took the train into London. So from the south of England in Canterbury, like close to the coast, up to London because we were going to see Ralph Fiennes play Hamlet. And it was a great version of Hamlet. After we were done with the show, okay, so I should say that we had one of our friends used a guide dog. And the guide dog had, when we were in the play, I was amazed that the guide dog just kind of like was under the seat and just kind of chilling, listening to Hamlet. I always thought that's really cool that this
Yeah.
dog like gets to watch Hamlet and listen to Hamlet without a ticket. That was just rad. And then after we saw the show, we needed to get back to the train station. Well, we had been out kind of late and there was one more train to Canterbury. And so we were in a time crunch and this taxi pulls up but says that there are too many of us and the driver can't bring us to the train station because there are too many and we're going to have to split up and we won't be able to remain as a group. And with a little bit of sort of negotiation and kind of like, oh, we're international students, we didn't know, oh my gosh. The taxi driver said, okay, well, if if the dog can be on the ground and if you points at me can be on the ground so no one will see that I've got more people than I'm legally allowed to have, I'll take you to the train station. And so the dog and I were on the bottom, like on the floor of this taxi, careening around London, trying
Oh
to
my.
get to the train station on time. One of the most unusual experiences of my life, and definitely, one of the strangest experiences with transportation. But
Wow.
we all were fine. Oh, another thing, by the way, I forgot about this. I was talking about the underground. I said undergrad. That's funny. But when we were coming up from the underground, the guide dog did not want to go on the escalator
Mm,
because its paws and its nails did not like those grooves, on an
mhm.
escalator, on the escalator steps. And so I ended up several times picking up the guide dog
Oh.
and carrying the guide dog on the escalator. And so that was wild too. Talk about like a place where this guide dog would not usually be, right? Like
Mhm.
why would a guide dog daily need to use the escalator? But that was a unique night for many reasons. Hamlet and the dog and the taxi and it was just pretty wild.
Yeah.
Other kinds of things, when you're traveling, I was thinking about those electric scooters that are all over cities now, Avery,
Yeah.
and they get left all over. I tried one with my partner once in LA. It was kind of fun. But oh my gosh, when you were talking about Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, and like people going up on the sidewalks, and you have to realize that, oh, the sidewalk is kind of like a second street.
Mhm.
Man, those scooters. Oh my gosh. So they're definitely a thing now. And then fun stuff like a funicular that takes you up a mountain or a gondola, like going up in a gondola that's hanging from a big like wire in the sky, or a ski lift that's going to take you up the mountain. These are pretty cool because you're conquering space that you could not conquer just with a road. You have to go through the sky, or you
Mm,
have to go literally up the side of a mountain, and that's pretty interesting when you travel and you see those things. And then finally, the board game Ticket to Ride. Okay. So,
yes.
helping people travel from city to city, establishing train routes, and a lot of games follow this kind of formula. I think Ticket to Ride is probably the best known one, but there are a whole bunch of games that are about establishing routes and making money from your train routes. And the sort of formula is the more routes you have, the more passengers you can move around, the more money you can make, and thus the more points you will get in the game. So allowing travel is part of kind of what you're trying to do, opening up these routes so that people can get from place to place.
Absolutely. I love playing Ticket to Ride. Very fun, very fun.
Have you played all the sort of like alternative maps?
Oh, I have not. What are those like?
Oh man. Well, each one throws kind of a new little wrinkle in and gives you either a different way of scoring or a different thing you have to get through. If you look at Ticket to Ride Europe, you have to like tunnel through the mountains, so you need extra locomotive cars to lay down tracks, and it's really cool. There are, oh my gosh, there are several at this point. There's like Legendary Asia, which is this really cool like if all the legends were true, and what would happen when you were moving around with these different spaces. And I don't know. It's each map is different, but they're fun.
That's amazing. And even when we are growing up learning about play with transportation, there are oftentimes gender stereotypes or expectations enforced onto different types of these transportations. Like, even, okay, so while I did some research according to European perspectives, so disclaimer on, where these perspectives are coming from, but early expectations had women not being allowed to be out on their own without a chaperone, especially in Victorian times and even before that. Like most of history, women not being allowed out without a chaperone. And in the 19th century, when bikes became a thing, they were mostly for men first. And then by the time that women had to fight for liberation was also around the time that they just fought the norm and used them themselves. And according to a 1896 cycling book titled Wheels of Change, to men, the bicycle in the beginning was merely a new toy, another machine added to the long list of devices they knew in their work and their play. But to women, it was a steed on which they rode into a new world. And even from the 1300s onward toward the 15th century and up until the 1930s, riding side saddle was the expectation for women because apparently it would keep their virginity intact. And according to some research, the first side saddles were actually just pillows attached to a man's saddle. And this was all just so that women could just sit with their legs on one side of the horse, and so that their, skirts would be okay, then their modesty and their image of themselves would be okay. And of course, there were women who would, eventually break these molds and kind of delve away from that. But back at that time, even then, a lot of times when women could ride side saddle, they would often have to be steered by a man or a boy until later side saddle innovations were adjusted. And so I think with kind of these examples in mind, I think it just goes to show how oftentimes that men kind of created the world that they wanted without really thinking about women, and especially with excluding women from the freedom of transportation and the exploration, that we've been able to talk about so readily. And then when we talk about marketing of toys for different genders as well, I mean, My Little Pony was, when it came out in the 80s, it was reserved, it was intended to be aimed at girls who were interested in having horses and having stables of their own, rather than those that were interested in keeping house and tending to infants. And that's a remarkable kind of delve into the adventurous kind of genre of toys for girls because yeah, I mean, toy babies, toy kitchens, food and housekeeping, like that was another way that play was used to reinforce gender stereotypes and expectations on women, whereas the boys would be able to, play with toys about hunting or fishing or building or destroying. They got all those adventurous, kind of active, proactive toys. Whereas now it's a little bit, we've had opportunities for companies to be more diverse from those expectations, which is grand. So the dichotomy of, My Little Pony versus the domestic kind of toys was that My Little Ponies were they were just for kind of the adventurous spirit of girls and they had, some realistic horses in the beginning and then they eventually delved into the more fantastical sides of things. But they were made to be played with to every sense of the word. Like they were waterproof, they were just chunky plastic. Like you could just smash them, play with them, and like dunk them in water. Like you could do whatever you wanted. You could brush their hair, you could get their hair all tangled, you can braid them. Like there were opportunities for you to be kind of aesthetic and gentle with them, but you could also just mash them and take them on all sorts of adventures, which I definitely did with mine growing up. There is also a horse game online in modern times called Star Stable Online, where notably you only play as a female protagonist, and I think the world of this horse game is very much female led with a lot of that kind of female protagonists, which is interesting because even then, a lot of the percentages in the world, we have a lot of amateur. We have a lot of women involved in amateur equestrianism, whereas the professional equestrian world is run a lot by men, which is fascinating, determined by, how in what ways are women allowed to be in these kinds of spaces anyway. But of course, there's always a stereotype of, the horse girls and whatever. But I think when we stereotype horse girls or horse people as, just liking horses, maybe it's seen a as a as a frail, two-dimensional enjoyment or hobby. But I mean, when you look at a game like Star Stable, you're in a massive open world called Jorvik where there's magic, but also realism, and you get to collect horses and explore and race and quest. Like, you're saving this country from an oil drilling company, as well as evil spirits and forces. And that's pretty adventurous, and I really admire the way that that horse game has kind of incorporated those aspects of, yeah, you get to care for a horse, but yeah, you also get to race around, destroy monsters, and fight for good and adventure and have that, get your hands dirty and really get involved kind of spirit. And of course, nowadays there also is the controversy of Star Stable having they used to be more focused on their storyline and their quest and their main story about saving the world, but they're releasing so many new horses all the time that people are starting to question, like, is this game now just becoming a spend your money and buy more horses kind of game? Because that's not really what a lot of the players wanted in the beginning. So there is that side of playing with horses and playing with the experience of riding it, but how that might look to outsiders versus how it might feel to the people who get to play it. Because I think playing with horses it's honestly just empowering if at the core of it. And I think that's really the stereotype that needs to be crushed about it, is that it's just like two-dimensional. But really there's more to it.
I love the idea of creating a binary of I don't love this, but it's interesting. Let me just qualify that. I think it's interesting. The idea of, okay, girls, you get horses, boys, you get cars and trucks, whether they're Hot Wheels or plastic dump trucks or Transformers, whatever it is. Because, I mean, if you look at them side by side, they are both modes of transportation. They
Yeah.
both perform work, you know? And Avery, I was just thinking about how cars and horses started like competing with each other. And in fact, the very first cars were called horseless carriages. And you know, Avery, how we still measure the power of a car is in horsepower,
Horsepower. Yep, there
right?
we go.
And so the fascinating thing is that these two concepts began side by side, and then at some point they diverged. And so I'll have a little more to say about sort of animals and transportation when we get to our final thoughts section, but that is just fascinating to me. Other sort of gendered approaches to transportation that I have seen many bumper stickers where folks who identify as women have claimed trucks, particularly big trucks, and bumper stickers, for example, that say, "Silly boys, trucks are for girls," right? So, like claiming a masculine space and
Mhm.
sort of saying, "I am a girl and I am driving a truck," and that's okay. Or motorcycle culture, where motorcycles kind of are a masculine space and maybe Vespas are a feminine space, and the power that both of those kind of have. But you absolutely, okay, so there's a Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall just down the street from me, close to Chapman, and there are motorcycle gatherings there a lot. And it is very clear how the women who are involved in motorcycle culture have claimed their space because there is a very specific way that the women dress as opposed to the guys, and what the leather outfits mean to the women versus the guys. Are they protecting the women? Are they kind of like showing the feminine shape? It's very interesting, the idea of who gets to be a motorcycle rider and what does that mean? How do you kind of communicate that? And finally, I looked quite a bit when I was getting ready for today at lowrider culture. Okay, so lowrider culture primarily began with the Chicano population in Southern California. Also, the African American population has kind of embraced this. It's not limited to those populations, but that's kind of where it started. And lowrider culture began as fairly gendered. And so women were allowed to be novias, right? Like girlfriends or riders in the car, but would not work on a car, would not sort of stand by the car to show it off. They were showing off themselves rather than the car, and usually they would not drive. And so there is a new movement to kind of invite women into the lowrider space. Lowrider culture also kind of looking at what is a car and what does it get to be, and how do you modify that to sort of show off your cultural identity and stand apart from the crowd. And so women are now claiming that space, and there was a really cool article with all these lowriders that women were standing next to with pride and basically saying, "Look, this is my car and I drive it, and this is how I have modified it." So, really interesting way in which things have shifted recently.
Hmm. Very fascinating. When you mentioned motorcycles, that reminded me of, yeah, you're right. I think why do they why do they have just like scantily clad women posing next to motorcycles in a lot of those kinds of advertisements? Or something like historic, like even like with beer advertisements, it's kind of the same thing. And with car advertisements too, sometimes part of the marketing strategy for the vehicle is having quote unquote heterosexual eye candy next to it. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But I would love to be a motorcycle person one day, except for the heightened risk of injury that is very prevalent for that, just because, especially in America, it's not mostly we use cars, right? So, cars are dominant everywhere, and thus the injury risk for motorcycles is just, not very fun. There is a lot to talk about regarding risk, the thrill of the chase, thrill of the race, and the danger involved in our either our daily commutes or our very special ones that we reserve for the movies and games. In the game slash series, The Last of Us, the working car in an apocalyptic zombie landscape, the working car is the rarest resource of them all. I mean, think of all the parts that need to be working in order for a single car to function normally. And Joel and Ellie have to travel from Boston to Colorado, and they have access to a car for maybe like a half to a third of the time. And then, even then, when they do have a working car, they get stopped like a couple times by a massive amount of dead cars that have been flooding out of large cities that are just frozen there permanently during doomsday. And these cars have expired, and they're just all sitting there as a huge obstacle to these characters in their journey. So it's interesting that, even when the car can represent travel and freedom, it can also be a huge obstacle and a problem to be solved, especially when we think of, the apocalypse and surviving without this technology. What do we do then? And in other cases, the characters in the game do get a horse, which is, the alternative to that. But there's always that sense of danger even when they are in the car too, like the image of the zombies attacking them from outside, or in Jurassic Park when, the characters are stuck inside that car and the T-Rex, is about to just munch on them and chomp on them and, screaming from inside the car like that. Such all those suspenseful scenes in the movies of, where the danger is lurking outside the car, is very captivating for us.
I'll throw one out there too, Avery.
Yeah.
Cujo, Stephen King's Cujo, which is about mom and child trapped in a car with a rabid dog outside. And
Whoa.
so, Avery, there's a lot of claustrophobia in that story and movie. And just yeah, absolutely. The car is safety, but what if there's a way that the animal or the threat can get into the car? And ultimately, what happens when you have to leave the car? So I love that idea of how long can you keep danger at bay? Oh, also
Mhm.
the old urban legend about scratching at the side of the car,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they keep going in the car. And then I think it's typically a couple, right? A couple that's gotten lost in the woods or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
And they get where they're going and they open the car and there is a hook on the door handle because apparently there's a very scary character who has been trying to get in the car by using the hook. So, yeah, those things just kind of came flooding into my mind.
Absolutely, yeah. And when we are trying to escape danger with the car, that appears super often in the movies to a point of mythology. I did mention Knives Out and the car chase scene in there. It's my favorite car chase scene of all time. I mean, Marta is driving this shabby car and flooring it at 60 miles per hour, while Ransom or Chris Evans is telling her to go faster, and she's just like, "I'm flooring it. It's just the scenario." While the cops are going 80 plus miles an hour, and even then, like the suspense, the drama, it's there. It's funny, it's realistic, and I was on the edge of my seat even while I was smiling and laughing because it was so funny. Like, it's true, it's realistic, and honestly, it's more true than the James Bond car chases with like all the explosions and the fast, the fast expensive cars. Like, honestly, I can't really relate to those anymore. Like, yeah, those are cool, and sure, Tom Cruise can ride a bike off of a cliff, but like, honestly, seeing an everyday car in such a extraordinary situation, like, it was really cool. And even with And even then, going back to horses in the game's Red Dead Redemption, like with the horses as the main method of transportation, you can still do all your robbing. You can rob other horses, you can rob stagecoaches, and some of the best, my some of my favorite moments in Red Dead Redemption involve you're riding your horse, you're galloping next to a train, and then you jump from your horse to the train in motion, and then you proceed to, rob the train. And I think the speed of that combined with the risk makes those scenarios fun, and then playing with that, incorporating the play of the game that allows you to experience that excitement without actually having to jump onto a moving train from a horse. And then speaking of trains, why are superheroes always stopping trains from crashing into each other, Drew? Like every single superhero movie. And they always like stand at the front of it, right? And like use their hands like out in front of them, and they're just their feet are just on the train tracks. And then they just slowly skid, to the edge of the broken bridge, and right before the train goes over, they're able to stop it. Like that is such a classic scene in so many superhero movies. And even with Bullet Train, the movie, where it's not a traditional regular train, it's an extra, extra fast train. Like the way that they had the action movie sequences, on this Japanese experience, of course, because a lot of the characters in this movie are also, not from Japan. So they're also kind of experiencing it with the audience of like, oh, look, there's this like cool costumed character, or like, wow, these high tech technology doors, and the high-tech bathroom on the train with the bidet or whatever. And having these extraordinary characters, who are assassins and killers, and out to get each other. They're just dealing with the drama of being on this confined space, of being trapped in a train together that's moving at really high speeds, and somehow characters end up on the outside of this bullet train. And it's so like I don't know if they would actually survive it in real life, but it's fun to play around with the idea, right? Of, oh my gosh, he broke the windshield of the train. He's out, like it's so extraordinary that it is a marvel to play with. And I would definitely watch Bullet Train again. I can't wait to watch it again.
And for extra added irony, there's the character who assigns all the other characters Thomas the Tank Engine characters
Yes.
and
Oh
give
my
them
gosh, yeah.
stickers. I mean,
Yes.
that's just I love that. From Bullet Train to old British, kind of steam engine style train. I love that.
Yes. Yeah. What about you, Drew?
Well, okay. So I wrote down some thoughts that I had when I was thinking about racing. Let's start with racing and then we'll talk about other dangers. Drag races. So I am currently watching the movie Carnival of Souls, which is from the early 60s. It's known as a horror movie, but it's really more of like a Twilight Zone kind of art house movie. And at the very beginning of this movie, with nothing preceding it, you are thrown into the beginning of a drag race with a
Wow.
car of girls being challenged by a car of boys. And this is not too spoilery because it happens in the first few minutes, but the guys get very aggressive and they push the girls' car off of a bridge and into the water. And so that drag race, basically, whenever you see drag races in movies, no matter what's going on, whether it's American Graffiti or it's all of the Fast and Furious stuff, right? Whenever you see a drag race, you're always thinking, okay, which characters are going to get hurt, right?
Mhm.
For me, it's less about which character is going to, or car, really, it's about cars, which car is going to win the race and which car is going to get messed up in the process. Um, Essentially a drag race ride at the Disney parks is Radiator Springs Racers. And so you literally are put into character during the ride as you're going to go up against this other car. And so you race around the track with this other car and see which car is going to win. NASCAR, I mean,
Mhm.
NASCAR, the idea of, again, okay, who's going to win? Is everybody going to survive? what's going to happen? Is there going to be a car that crashes? Is somebody going to, and if you're looking at a NASCAR style race in a movie or something, or there was an episode of the show Poker Face that was like this, is someone going to mess with the other person's car in order to make it not function properly? Horse racing. It's impossible for me to hear bum 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 ba dun 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 without thinking of horse racing, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, horse racing and car racing. Again, the connection between cars and horses, but with horse racing, you make bets. And so, which horse is going to win? How do you know? What are the stats? All that crazy stuff. And I also thought about the movie Speed with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. Oh my gosh. Classic movie from, I think, the 90s. I'm pretty sure it's the 90s. And the Sandra Bullock character has to keep the bus that she drives over 60 miles per hour, or else the bomb is going to go off. And so the tension of having to, I mean, not racing another car or bus, but racing this bomb was just a really fascinating idea. And then from there to board games, the most recent board game that I played with my buddy Christian, who we had on this show a little while ago, is
Yay.
a game called Heat, Pedal to the Metal. And in Heat, you are racing around a track, you are shifting gears on your little player mat for your car, and you can upgrade your car and get all these cool things that will help. And the cards that you play simulate the speed that you're going in any given moment. And then you also collect heat, which you have to deal with. And you have to kind of like purge from your engine, or else your car is going to like go out of control and you're going to end up way, 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 way back. A few other ideas in terms of danger, other than kind of racing around. The board game Scotland Yard. You are either a detective chasing Mr. X, who's the villain, or you are Mr. X trying to evade capture. And if you are actually both sides use taxis and buses and the underground. And what's really fascinating is when the detectives use these tickets, they give the tickets to the Mr. X player. So if you use the underground, then you're going to give Mr. X the opportunity to use the underground. And it's a big old chase, a big old, like, I'm going to corner you, and then I'm finally going to land on the space where you, Mr. X, have traveled. And so the Mr. X character only at certain points in the game has to reveal where they are. The detectives are always visible, but Mr. X only pops up from time to time. And I was also thinking about the ocean and danger in the ocean. The very unfortunate accident that just happened with the Titan submersible trying to reach the Titanic, and something happened, something went wrong, and the entrepreneur and the crew, the folks that had paid to be part of this submersible, were unfortunately lost on the voyage, and I think they're still trying to figure out what exactly happened. But the danger of going deeper and deeper and deeper and almost taking a vehicle into a part of the ocean where maybe humans aren't supposed to go because the danger is too much. And finally, this is one of my favorite trains and favorite stories because of the
Mhm.
danger, and that is Agatha Christie's great Murder on the Orient Express. And
Yes.
yeah, I think Agatha Christie highly influenced Knives Out, and I love that. But the idea of being, like with Bullet Train, being trapped on a moving vehicle, and then at some point also the Orient Express has to stop because it gets snowed in, and then everybody's trapped not on a moving vehicle but on a stationary vehicle, and they don't know when it's going to be able to move again. But the question becomes, who is there with you? Who is around you? And who represents danger. And with Hercule Poirot, Christie's famous Belgian detective, not French, folks, but Belgian, trying to figure out, okay, how do I learn more about the people who are literally traveling with me, my fellow travelers? And how, by finding out about them, do I find out more about the crime that has been committed? I would love one day, Avery, to ride the Orient Express from Paris to Istanbul and just kind of like recreate that train trip that was in Victorian times, so posh and so exciting. And yes, there's a lot of like Western European exoticization. So maybe
Mhm.
if I can leave that exoticization behind and just enjoy the beauty of the ride and the beauty of the train moving through many different cultures as it goes on its trip.
Yeah, and speaking of Agatha Christie, also Death on the Nile, same situation oh,
Oh,
similar
yeah.
situation with a boat on, the Nile River, and, oh no, a murder happens, and Poirot has to figure it out. This just reminds me of how many even imaginary and special vehicles out there that we might wish that were real or have rarely experienced in our lives. Like I have yet to be on a hot air balloon, I think, but I would love to be on one. But I would love to experience, seeing like a ton of hot air balloons floating up into the air around me and seeing in person, all the colorful ones up in the air. I think that would be a really cool bucket list item of mine. I have toured some fire trucks recently because my friend works at a fire station, and I got so surprised at how many panels of stuff they had on all the sides because I previously kind of thought that like, oh, a fire truck's, it's just red on the outside. Like on the inside, there's probably like one door that opens and it has all their gear. But actually, the ones that we saw had little doors all around both sides and the back, and they hid like an 800-foot water hose in the back, which was is just that's imagining just I mean that yeah, that's a really long hose, and it was also like a really wide hose too for fire putting out purposes, and some of them had like really tall ladders that could go hundreds of feet in the air, and just being able to stand on one of those, like I kind of want to because I'm not super afraid of heights, but I feel like if I did, I would be afraid of heights after I did sit on that all the way up there. And I also recently have seen in person a draft horse show at a county fair, which was my first time seeing, like, in action a bunch of these surreys that were led and driven by 1 or 2 or 4 or 6 horses. I mean, seeing the 6-horse ones turn around the edge of the hill or the side of the building and just see all the dust up in the air and see them just magically slowly arrive to you. It was really, really freaking cool. Although seeing the horses up close and seeing how much they kind of like and once they were standing still, seeing how much they were just moving their heads, and I felt like they were probably kind of uncomfortable. Like I after reading Black Beauty also as a kid, like you kind of just internalize that horses are uncomfortable with like all the stuff in their mouths, all the stuff around their heads. Like I was imagining that I was a horse and I was like, no, thank you. I don't want to be like tied to a ton of these other things like this. Like, I don't really want to start caring for draft horses and like driving them, but I think it's interesting like how much a part of the history that they are and how special they are in our everyday lives because we don't really see them every day.
Yeah, absolutely. These special vehicles, which we're aware of, but very rarely kind of like interact with. Jet skis, for example, flying across the ocean on a jet ski or a lake. I have yet to ride a jet ski, but I would love to. The Formula One racers that are these beautiful, kind of shiny, sleek cars that race around a track, and how much strength it takes to sort of control those. Spacecraft, of course, very few of us get to go in spacecraft, but going into breaking the bounds of the Earth and going outside of the atmosphere. Hot air balloons. Yeah, I agree, Avery. I have yet to be in one, but I would like to be. I think if you are really fascinated by sort of what it would be like to be in a forest of hot air balloons and what it would be like to sort of travel, I have seen and my partner has talked about hot air balloons over Cappadocia in Turkey. And the photos that I have seen, that's a bucket list item for me. And I think that people have really enjoyed that flight and the landscapes that go on below them. How about blimps? And
Oh.
I'm thinking specifically, Avery, okay, here we go. I'm
Mhm.
thinking of Kiki's Delivery Service.
Oh my
And
gosh.
the very end, like the climax of the movie where Kiki has to save, by the way, for our listeners who are not familiar with this particular character, Kiki is so this is a Studio Ghibli movie, and Kiki is a sort of witch in training and has been having trouble with her broom, flying on her broom, but is getting back into it and back used to it after sort of not being able to fly as effectively as she used to be able to. And she is tasked with saving this entire blimp or dirigible full of people. And the brilliance of this, I could talk about Kiki forever, but
Mhm.
the brilliance of this climactic moment when the soundtrack fades out and all you hear is the wind whipping past Kiki as she flies around on her broom and the creaks and the big sounds of the blimp as it is careening out of control and she's desperately trying to find a way to save these people. One of the most dramatic kind of special vehicles slash imaginary vehicles with the broom that I have ever seen in a movie, and it's an animated movie, but man, it is more intense than most live action movies that have sections like this.
Yeah, it's beautiful. One of the imaginary vehicles that I would love to exist would be the Pokemon Snap vehicle, which it's Pokemon Snap is a series of Pokemon games where you sit in this little like it's like a research vehicle and it has like a bubble top and you just take photos of Pokemon as you go through different environments. And that on the Nintendo 64 was just life-changing to me. It kind of inspired me to be a photographer, and it's just wonderful. I just want to have one of those, like, little bubbles. I mean, now that I think about it, Jurassic World did do that in its movies, and that didn't turn out very well, but I think in a happy world like that of Pokemon where I'm mostly safe would be pretty enjoyable. And I also, like, in, was it BioShock Infinite and other kind of steampunk air floating vibes. Those kinds of worlds are also really appealing to me. Like I would love to have like kind of old world style advanced technology of air floating ships and airships and all of that would be really magical. But yeah, that's it for my imaginary vehicles of my choice.
I love the idea of sort of that Jules Verne era, steampunk era, where you have things like Captain Nemo's submarine that
Yeah.
is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or
Mhm.
Journey to the Center of the Earth, where they sort of, in that version, they kind of like fall into the center of the Earth and then they have various vehicles that they move around in. But there are many examples of sort of drilling to the center of the earth. I think Artemis Fowl has this, if I'm remembering correctly. The Artemis Fowl series has like drills that go up and down, or like elevators that go up and down. So, what is life like under
Mhm.
the Earth's surface? Fantastic Voyage, where everybody gets shrunk down and they have a little submarine type craft that you can navigate inside the human body. The Starship Enterprise, and of course, X Wings and the Millennium Falcon, Doctor Who's TARDIS, other time machines like the Back to the Future time machine or Bill and Ted's time machine, or even the time machine, the
Mhm.
original time machine, H.G. Wells. So we can only imagine having these vehicles. We can only imagine going to these places and being in control of them. And in particular, faster than light travel, FTL travel, we're going to need that to kind of get out of a solar system without growing old on our way
Mhm.
to other places. So things like the Millennium Falcon, which or the Starship Enterprise, they use hyperspace or warp technology or whatever it is to kind of like break out of that light speed barrier. And then also Lego spaceships or the game Galaxy Trucker, where you are trying to create a spaceship, an imaginary spaceship, and trying to figure out what exactly am I going to need? Am I going to need, if I'm making something out of Lego bricks, am I going to need like a grabby hand to pick up rocks off of a surface? Am I going to need lasers to like attack any space pirates that are coming? Where am I going to need to see? And what kind of engines am I going to need? Galaxy Trucker, very similar. Like, where are my quarters going to be? And what am I going to need to fend off a meteor shower? Or what's going to knock off this side of my vehicle? Just absolutely, absolutely fun uses of the imagination to imagine vehicles that never were, but maybe could have been, and then vehicles that are able to break the laws of physics or the laws of life on Earth as we know it, and do things like go to the center of the Earth or go into a person's body.
Yeah, and that's something that's really amazing about vehicles and playing with the doing this transportation play is that you're right, it really activates our imaginations and understandings of what really is possible and what could be possible. To start off some concluding thoughts, I asked my friend about some of his experiences with, vehicles of that sort, and like many others, he, is autistic and just really loved trains extra, extra growing up. And one of the things that he said was, my grandpa would show me his electric train set to me at a young age, and it was magical. Like the use of the word magical really stood out to me because I think that is kind of it's one of the core situations of learning and playing with these vehicles feels like a sense of magic. And whether you are a kid playing with Thomas the Tank Engine, an absolute classic, I was also obsessed with Thomas the Tank Engine, or you are a grandfather putting together an electric train set under your Christmas tree, or even in a entire room in your house, like there is that sense of wonder and magic and figuring out how the pieces go together. And even when you are watching something like Transformers, you do get to experience, vehicular characters with all sorts of personalities, backstories, and cultures. And I think this aspect of play really it's a wonderful branch of the play tree, if I do say so myself. What about you, Drew?
I love those thoughts. And I was just thinking about the when you were talking about magic, um, you were kind of maybe hinting towards Santa's sleigh, right? The magic of
Yeah, yeah.
Santa's sleigh. And the I was thinking of the Polar Express and then the kids who got all the way to the North Pole and then one of them was chosen to ride with Santa. What's the deal with Rise of the Guardians and Santa's sleigh?
The moment that Santa's sleigh appears in that movie, it's an animated movie, it, like, kind of crashes to the ground, the reindeer are, like, skidding, the sleigh is, like, making sparks on the ground or something, and, like, he's just, like, holding the reins, and then it kind of reveals the Santa character, and I really liked that portrayal of it because up until then, you kind of Santa's sleigh was portrayed as like, "Oh, it just floats in the sky, it doesn't really need to obey gravity," but in the world of this movie, the magic of the kids believing in Santa kind of powers the vehicle. So at this point in the story, it was kind of rough. Like the magic was faltering a little bit. So having the gravity take down the sleigh like a little bit like that and just have it roughly skid, like it kind of woke my brain up to be like, oh whoa, like this could be real. Like the sense of physics in telling the story is actually making it have a very kind of edgy kind of portrayal that I really like.
I love that. And the magic flying reindeer.
Yes,
And
yeah.
reindeer are big creatures. I mean, they are very tied to the ground, right?
Yeah.
But and I think it was the Night Before Christmas poem that popularized that there were like 8 flying reindeer. I think there were 8.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then like Rudolph comes in, and just the lore behind the reindeer in itself is like a whole separate thing,
Yeah,
and I kind of love that.
yeah.
But for final thoughts, concluding thoughts, we trust our lives to transportation. We have to get where we're going and we want to get there in one piece. And so it makes sense that we play to rehearse driving and piloting, even planes with like flight simulator stuff, or that we may never fly a plane in our lives, but we rehearse it just in case, you know? Passengering, all of these might be ways that we rehearse coping with being responsible for others' lives and our own lives, and to kind of demystify what it's like to drive or fly or sail and playfully make peace with taking control of a vast machine. So many young people are worried, including my daughter, are worried about what is it going to mean to get a driver's license and take control of a car, because that's a big responsibility, not only for yourself, but for other people on the road. And then, as you and I have been talking about, remembering where transportation came from, horses and dog sleds or Santa's sleigh, they might take us back to a time when animals were more at the center of our everyday lives and they lived side by side with us. Horses would have been in a stable, dogs would have been right there ready to help us out. Cows would have been there and we would have gotten milk from cows, eggs from chickens. I mean, animals were just there with us and they were very common. In fact, Avery, have you heard the old joke that it used to be that everybody had horses, but only rich people could own cars? And
No,
now
yeah.
everybody's got a car, but only rich people can own horses.
Mhm, mhm.
So, there's a little bit of truth. There's a little bit of truth to that joke. And so maybe a small bit of nostalgia in our world that is so intensely technology focused. And maybe a little bit of power, and maybe a little bit of being able to go fast and far and outdo the limitations of the human body. And I'll conclude here with a quote from the iconic character Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. And Jack Sparrow says he's questioned about, oh, if you have a ship, you could go to the Spanish Main. The Keira Knightley character questions him about this. And he says, not just the Spanish Main, love, the entire ocean, the entire world. Wherever we want to go, we'll go. That's what a ship is, you know. It's not just a keel and a hull and a deck and sails. That's what a ship needs. But what a ship is, what the Black Pearl really is freedom. And so that's where it takes us, Avery. The open road, the open sea, the final frontier. It's us in control, and us in control of something that is so much more than we could be on our own.
Beautifully put, as always, Drew.
Thanks, Avery.
This has been Powered by Play with Avery and Drew. If you've been enjoying this podcast, you can support us online at Ko-fi. That is ko-fi.com/poweredbyplay. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.